Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all having a fantastic day. Before we begin, please make sure to hit the subscribe button. For decades, Rob Reiner was known as many things: a legendary filmmaker, a sharp political voice, a master of heartfelt storytelling. But behind the camera, away from Hollywood premieres and public applause, there existed another story, one far quieter, far more complicated, and until now, largely untold. It was the story of his marriage to Michele. To the public, their relationship appeared stable, respectful, even admirable. No tabloid chaos, no public feuds, no scandal splashed across magazine covers. Yet those closest to Rob Reiner knew there was far more beneath the surface. And now, in what many are calling his final confession on the subject, Reiner has finally allowed the truth to emerge, not as gossip, but as reflection. This is not a story of betrayal in the traditional Hollywood sense. It is something deeper, more human, and in many ways, more heartbreaking. A love that began in quiet confidence. Rob Reiner met Michele long after his first marriage had ended. He was older, wiser, and more cautious. Michele was not a Hollywood starlet chasing fame. She was intelligent, grounded, and uninterested in the spotlight that followed Reiner wherever he went. From the beginning, their relationship felt different. Friends described Michele as Rob's anchor, someone who listened more than she spoke, who understood the weight of a life lived in public, and who offered him something rare in Hollywood: peace. They married in 1989, choosing stability over spectacle. Their life together was intentionally private. While Rob continued to make films that shaped generations, Michele remained mostly behind the scenes, raising their children and building a home that felt separate from the chaos of the industry. But privacy, as Rob would later admit, can sometimes hide emotional distance just as easily as it protects love. The invisible divide. In his confession, Rob Reiner spoke not with regret alone, but with clarity that comes only after years of reflection. He described his marriage not as unhappy, but as uneven. "I was present," he admitted, "but not always available." Rob was consumed by work, politics, and creative ambition. His mind was constantly racing, new ideas, new causes, new battles. Michele, meanwhile, lived in a world defined by routine, responsibility, and emotional labor. What no one saw from the outside was the growing divide between their internal lives. There were no screaming matches, no dramatic ultimatums, just silence, long stretches of emotional absence. Conversations that never quite reached the deeper truths they both carried. Rob later described it as two people loving each other sincerely, but speaking different emotional languages. Fame as a barrier, not a bond. One of the most revealing parts of Reiner's confession centered on fame itself. Hollywood, he said, doesn't just change how people see you. It changes how you see yourself. And that shift can quietly reshape a marriage. While Michele never sought attention, Rob was constantly surrounded by it. Praise, criticism, admiration, outrage. His identity was continuously reinforced by the public eye. Over time, that external validation replaced something essential. "I didn't realize it then," Rob said, "but I was slowly outsourcing my emotional fulfillment." Michele became the stable background of his life rather than an active emotional partner. Not because she failed him, but because he failed to notice the shift. The moment of realization. The confession didn't come during the marriage. It came long after the divorce. Rob and Michele separated in 2021 after more than 30 years together, a decision that shocked many precisely because there had been no visible warning signs. According to Rob, the realization arrived not in anger, but in stillness. "It wasn't one fight," he explained. "It was the understanding that we were surviving, not growing." That sentence alone changed how many people view the relationship. Survival can look a lot like success from the outside, but internally, it can feel like emotional stagnation, a quiet erosion rather than a dramatic collapse. No villains, only consequences. What makes Rob Reiner's confession so unusual in Hollywood is what it doesn't include. There is no villain, no accusations, no blame placed on Michele, no attempt to rewrite history in his favor. Instead, Rob took responsibility in a way that felt raw and deeply personal. "I don't think I was a bad husband," he said carefully. "I don't think I was the husband she deserved." That admission alone resonated with countless people who saw their own relationships reflected in his words. Long marriages where love existed, but connection slowly faded. Michele's silence speaks volumes. Michele Singer has never publicly responded to Rob's confession, and in many ways, that silence speaks louder than any interview ever could. Those close to her say she has chosen peace over narrative control. No press tour, no rebuttal, no need to reshape public perception. In Rob's words, that's who she's always been. Her silence reinforces one of the most painful truths of the confession, that not all endings are fueled by drama. Some are simply the result of two people growing in different directions, quietly and irreversibly. The weight of regret without resentment. Rob Reiner does not speak of regret as self-punishment, but as education. I learned that love isn't just commitment, he said. It's curiosity. It's choosing to keep knowing the person in front of you. That line, shared in the aftermath of his divorce, struck a chord far beyond Hollywood. It reframed marriage not as endurance, but as emotional presence. His confession wasn't about salvaging an image. It was about honoring the truth of a shared life that mattered deeply, even in its ending. Why this confession matters now. In an industry built on illusion, Rob Reiner's honesty feels almost radical. He didn't wait for scandal. He didn't respond to rumors. He chose reflection over defense. And in doing so, he offered something rare. A mature, nuanced account of love that didn't fail dramatically, but faded quietly. His story challenges the idea that longevity equals success and reminds us that emotional connection requires constant attention, not just loyalty. The final truth. Rob Reiner's final confession about his marriage to Michele isn't about heartbreak. It's about awareness. It's about recognizing that love can be real and still insufficient. That two good people can do their best and still fall short. That endings don't always mean failure. Sometimes they mean honesty arrived too late, but arrived nonetheless. And perhaps that is the real truth finally revealed. Not that their marriage was a mistake, but that it was a lesson. One Rob Reiner is only now fully able to understand. In the quiet aftermath of his confession, Rob Reiner has not attempted to rewrite the past or search for sympathy. Instead, he has chosen something far more difficult: acceptance. He acknowledges that some truths only become visible when a chapter has already closed, when distance allows clarity to replace denial. What lingers most for him is not anger or bitterness, but gratitude. Gratitude for the years they shared, for the family they built, and for the stability Michele provided during moments when his own life felt chaotic and demanding. He has spoken about how easy it is to mistake routine for security, and how dangerous it can be to assume love will sustain itself without conscious effort. Today, Rob approaches relationships with a renewed sense of humility. He listens more. He pauses more. He no longer assumes that good intentions are enough. The lessons from his marriage have reshaped the way he understands partnership, not as a fixed promise, but as a living connection that requires continual care. If there is one final message in his confession, it is this: love is not proven by how long it lasts, but by how deeply it is nurtured while it exists. And sometimes the most honest act of love is acknowledging when it has reached its natural end. And perhaps that is the real truth finally revealed. Not that their marriage was a mistake, but that it was a lesson, one Rob Reiner is only now fully able to understand. In the months following that realization, Rob found himself revisiting moments he once considered ordinary: quiet dinners, long car rides, even the silences he had previously dismissed as comfort. With hindsight, those moments carried a different meaning. They were opportunities, some taken, many missed, to ask deeper questions, to listen without distraction, to remain emotionally present rather than simply physically there. What haunted him was not a single turning point, but the slow accumulation of small choices. Choosing work over conversation, choosing certainty over vulnerability, choosing to assume rather than to ask. None of these decisions felt significant at the time, yet together they shaped the emotional distance that eventually became impossible to ignore. Rob has since spoken about how easy it is to confuse stability with fulfillment, especially in long marriages. When nothing appears broken, there seems to be no urgency to fix what is quietly fading. Love, he realized too late, does not demand attention through crisis. It asks for it through consistency. There is no attempt in his reflection to reclaim the past. Instead, there is a gentler understanding that some relationships are meant to teach us how to love better, even if they cannot last forever. For Rob Reiner, that understanding did not arrive during the marriage, but it now defines how he honors it by telling its truth with humility and by carrying its lessons forward in silence rather than regret. By carrying those lessons forward, Rob Reiner began to understand something he had once overlooked. Endings do not erase meaning, they clarify it. The years he spent with Michele were not diminished by their separation. If anything, they gained definition. Time stripped away illusion and left behind something quieter, but more honest. He began to speak about love not as a promise made once, but as a choice made daily. In his view, the tragedy wasn't that the marriage ended, but that the realization arrived so late. Yet even that awareness came with grace. There was no urge to reopen old wounds, no desire to rewrite history in his favor, only an acceptance that growth does not follow a shared timeline. Rob has described how solitude after the marriage forced him to sit with questions he once avoided. Who was he when no one needed him? When success no longer filled the silence? In those moments, he recognized how often Michele had been the emotional constant, steady, patient, unassuming, while he was moving endlessly forward. What remains now is respect. Not the loud, performative kind, but the enduring kind that survives distance. He honors their story by refusing to sensationalize it, by acknowledging that some love stories are complete, not because they last forever, but because they reveal truths that change us permanently. And in that understanding, Rob Reiner found something unexpected, not closure, but peace. That peace did not arrive all at once. It unfolded slowly, in moments of stillness that Rob Reiner had rarely allowed himself during his years of constant motion. Without the structure of a long marriage anchoring his personal life, he became acutely aware of how much of his identity had been built around roles: husband, father, filmmaker, public figure, and how little time he had spent simply being present within those roles. He began to understand that love, especially enduring love, requires more than loyalty or shared history. It demands emotional courage, the willingness to be uncomfortable, to admit uncertainty, and to confront the parts of oneself that prefer distraction over intimacy. In his confession, Rob acknowledged that he often mistook productivity for purpose, believing that providing stability was the same as providing connection. Looking back, he spoke of Michele not with nostalgia, but with clarity. She had offered constancy in a world that rewarded momentum. She had asked for presence in a life that valued progress. Their disconnect was not rooted in a lack of care, but in opposing rhythms that neither fully recognized until time made the difference unmistakable. What remains now is not longing, but understanding. Rob Reiner does not frame his story as a cautionary tale, nor as a confession meant to absolve guilt. Instead, it stands as a quiet acknowledgement that some lessons only reveal themselves when there is nothing left to lose. Accept the chance to listen, to learn, and to carry forward a deeper awareness of what love truly asks of us. With that awareness, Rob Reiner found himself approaching the future differently than he ever had before. There was less urgency now, less need to fill every moment with motion or noise. The silence he once avoided became a place of reflection rather than discomfort. In it, he began to recognize how often he had equated being needed with being loved, and how easily that belief had shaped his priorities. He came to see that Michele had never asked for grand gestures or constant reassurance. What she sought was something far more subtle: attention without distraction, listening without defensiveness, presence without performance. These were not impossible requests, he realized, only ones he had postponed, assuming there would always be more time. As years passed, Rob stopped framing the end of their marriage as a loss. Instead, he viewed it as a turning point that redefined how he understood connection. Love, he now believed, was not proven through endurance alone, but through the willingness to remain emotionally available, even when life feels stable. There is no attempt in his reflection to reclaim what has passed. The chapter with Michele remains closed, but not diminished. It exists as a quiet foundation beneath everything that followed, a reminder that the most important relationships are not measured by how loudly they begin or how dramatically they end, but by how deeply they shape who we become long after they are over. Long after the public attention faded and the headlines moved on, that understanding stayed with him. It surfaced in quiet conversations, in moments of pause before speaking, in the way he now measured success, not by output but by alignment. Rob Reiner no longer chased the idea of balance as something to be achieved someday. He understood it as something practiced daily, often imperfectly, but with intention. The memory of his marriage to Michele became less about what went wrong and more about what it revealed. It taught him that emotional presence cannot be deferred, that love cannot thrive on assumptions, and that even the strongest foundations require maintenance. These were not lessons learned from failure, but from honesty. Honesty that arrived only when he was finally ready to face it. There is a quiet dignity in how he now speaks of that chapter of his life. No embellishment, no erasure, just acknowledgement. Michele remains part of his story, not as a symbol of regret, but as a reminder of a time when love existed in a form that was real, meaningful, and deeply human. And in carrying that truth forward, Rob Reiner found something lasting, not in holding on, but in understanding when to let go with grace. That grace did not come from forgetting, but from remembering honestly. Rob Reiner learned that memory itself can be an act of respect, one that doesn't distort the past to ease the present. He allowed the marriage to remain complex in his mind, neither idealized nor diminished. It was simply real, shaped by two people doing the best they could with what they understood at the time. As he moved forward, he carried a quieter version of himself into the world, one less certain but more attentive. He became more aware of how easily love can be taken for granted when it feels secure, and how important it is to keep asking questions, even when answers seem familiar. The absence Michele left behind was not loud, but it was instructive. In rare moments, he admitted that some love stories are not meant to be completed together. Some exist to teach patience, others teach humility. He believed, taught him how easily presence can be postponed, and how irreversible that postponement can become. What remains now is not regret, but reverence. Reverence for a shared life that mattered deeply, even in its quiet ending. And in that reverence, Rob Reiner finally found the clarity he had been missing all along, not about what love should have been, but about what it truly requires.